In our previous episode, we discussed Hulegu's sack of Baghdad in February 1258, as well as the death of the last Abbasid caliph, al-Mustasim. Hulegu quickly moved north to Maraha to rest and prepare for the next leg of his journey, effectively reducing the remaining independent powers along the Levantine coast. Nothing seemed to stop Hulegu and his massive army from subjugating the rest of the Muslim world. Many people in the region reaffirmed their submission as they travelled between Maraga and Tabriz during the summer of 1258. Sons and representatives came from Fars, Atabeg, various Caucasian lords, and the Ayyubid Sultan of Aleppo and Damascus, al-Nasir Yusuf. In person came the 90-year-old Badr al-Din Lutlu of Mosul, as well as the two Seljuk sultans of Rum, Iz al-Din Qayqaus II, and his half-brother, Rukn al-Din Kilich Arslan IV. The fall of the caliph sent shockwaves, and most were eager to reaffirm their vassalage lest they share in his fate. Iz al-Din Qayqaus, knowing Hulegu was already dissatisfied with him for his brief rebellion in 1256, made Hulegu a pair of fine boots with his portrait on the soles and kneeled before him, telling him, "Your slave hopes the Padishah will elevate this slave's head with his royal foot." Hulegu was pleased with himself. The conquests were coming easily, and it appeared that he would complete his older brother's will in due time. It's possible that Hulegu adopted a new title at this point, Il-Khan, which he began to use on coinage the following year. Generally, Il-Khan is translated as Viceroy or Subject Khan, with Il in Mongolian connoting submission. However, some argue that it is a Mongolian form of an older Turkic title, Ileg Khan, meaning sovereign. Some sources from the Ilkhanate use it in this sense. One writer refers to Genghis Khan as Il-Khan, even though such connotations of submission were quite inappropriate. Hulegu spent the rest of 1258 in Azerbaijan, wintering on Iran and the Mugan Plain, where the Mongols enjoyed the cool temperatures and lush pastures. Maraga emerged as Hulegu's de facto capital, and the region served as the Ilkhanate's administrative headquarters and summer retreat for the next 70 years. Hulegu proceeded to plot. From Syria to Egypt, intelligence was received about the statelet's fractured politics. The ruler of Mayafarakin in the Jazira had previously surrendered to the Mongols, but he revolted as the Mongol army approached Baghdad. Hulegu dispatched his son Yoshmut to deal with them. The Ayyubid Sultan of Syria, al-Nasir Yusuf, had been a Mongol tributary since the early 1240s, but he had failed to provide troops against Baghdad or appear in person before Hulegu. So Hulegu would appear before him in person, accompanied by 100,000 of his closest friends and at least 300,000 of their favourite horses. The newly established Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt was the only significant power, aside from the small Ayyubid princes and Crusader holdouts on the coast. In spring 1259, Hulegu sent Yoshmut and Kitbuqa as his vanguard, and in September he led the main army to Syria, anticipating a swift and glorious conquest. An-Nasir Salah ad-Din, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, also known as Saladin, unified Egypt and eastern Turkey about 80 years ago. Saladin intended for 3 of his sons to rule in a sort of confederacy after his death in 1193, with one in Cairo, Egypt, one in Aleppo, Syria, and one in Damascus, Syria, to be the senior among the others. Within 3 years, his plan failed. Saladin's brother, Al-Adil bin Ayyub, seized control of Damascus and Egypt, forcing Aleppo to recognize his authority. Al-Adil appointed his own sons as governors and abandoned the jihad, resulting in a fruitful 20-year truce with the Crusader states. The trade they brought was valuable, and Al-Adil was more concerned about his Seljuk and Zengid neighbours. It wasn't until 1218 that his system failed. That year, the Fifth Crusade landed in Egypt and quickly took Damietta. The Anatolian Seljuks backed Saladin's exiled son Al-Afdal in an attempt to take Aleppo, and Al-Adil died of illness in August 1218. Following his death, the Ayyubids never regained unity. Al-Adil's son, Al-Kamil, rose to power in Egypt but clashed with the Ayyubid princes of Syria, particularly his brother Al-Muazzam, who ruled Damascus. In the face of war with Al-Muazzam, in 1229, Al-Kamil agreed to a truce with the incoming Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II Hohenstaufen, bloodlessly returning Jerusalem to Christian hands for the first time since Saladin took it in 1187. Al-Kamil died in 1238, and his family fought for control of Egypt. It took 2 years for his oldest son, Al-Salih Ayyub, to take power. By that time, the Ayyubids of Syria and Egypt had achieved complete independence. In 1243, Al-Nasir Yusuf, the Prince of Aleppo, became a tributary to the Mongols. In Egypt, Al-Salih Ayyub demonstrated himself as a powerful and militaristic ruler, the last effective Ayyubid sultan, wielding power over his cousins in Syria. The first way to accomplish this was to invite Khwarezmian mercenaries from Syria to him. These were the remnants of Jalal al-Din Mingburnu's army, which had served as mercenaries and pillagers since Mingburnu's death in 1231, raiding for the highest price. In 1244, Al-Salih Ayyub invited them to Egypt with the intention of employing them, or at the very least preventing the Syrian Ayyubids from using them against him. The Khwarezmians, led by Husam al-Din Berka Khan, answered the call, sacking Jerusalem in early summer 1244, and the Crusaders lost Jerusalem for good. The panicked Franks formed an alliance against the Khwarezmians, assembling a massive army of Frankish troops, military ordinites, and Ayyubid princes of Damascus and Homs, all eager to keep the Khwarezmians out of the hands of Al-Salih Ayyub. In October 1244, the Khwarezmians crushed their largest field army since the Third Crusade, numbering approximately 13,000 men at La Forbi. It was a massacre, and the Crusader state's offensive capability was permanently broken. Representatives from Acre travelled to Europe and requested assistance. Only the repentant King Louis IX of France responded. Al-Salih Ayyub led the Khwarezmians north, and after assisting him in capturing Damascus, gave them the boot, and they were defeated and dispersed by Syrian forces in 1246. So ended the Khwarezmian Empire, roughly 20 years after Genghis Khan's invasion. Giving up on untrustworthy Khwarezmians, Al-Salih Ayyub turned to slave soldiers. Military slavery was not a new institution. It was used by the Abbasids, Fatimids, and Ayyubids, including Saladin himself. In general, Islamic military slavery differed greatly from what we know as chattel slavery. According to historian Bart Hacker, although his owner may buy or sell him and otherwise dictate certain life choices, the relationship of owner to soldier more closely resembled that of patron to client than master to slave in the Western sense. These are complex issues, but Muslim military slavery clearly did not define the soldier's occupation, wealth, social standing, or power. In fact, depending on the dynasty, military slavery increased a man's access to wealth and social status. Prior to the 12th century, these slave soldiers were commonly referred to as gulams, but by 1200, Mamluks had replaced them. Gulams and Mamluks could come from anywhere, but Turkic steppe nomads were preferred. They were bought as children aged 8 to 12, and their upbringing on the steppe had given them valuable experience in archery and horseback riding. The most physically skilled were sold as Mamluks, after which they were converted to Islam and given additional weapons and tactics training, as well as armour, horses, and state support. They were frequently taught languages, administrative skills, and how to read and write. They were expected to be completely loyal to their master, who bestowed numerous rewards on them. One Muslim monarch remarked that his gulams were more loyal than his own sons, despite possessing the same military skills as Turkic nomads. These men were the cream of the army under Al-Salih Ayyub, with excellent training and weapons. He increased their regiments, aided by the surplus of Turkic slaves on the market, following the Mongol invasion of the Western steppe in the 1230s and 40s. Many hundreds, if not thousands, of Kipchaks were sold overseas, from Egypt to India. Al-Salih established several Mamluk garrisons throughout Cairo, each with its own identity and name. The most famous were the Bahriya, named after the island in the Nile where their garrison was stationed. The first test for Al-Salih Ayyub's Mamluks occurred in 1250. As previously stated, King Louis of France took up the cross after learning of the fall of Jerusalem and defeat at La Forbi in 1244. After extensive preparation, he embarked on the Seventh Crusade. In June 1249, the Crusaders landed on the Egyptian coast, deciding that capturing Egypt's power base was critical to gaining control of the Holy Land. His timing was good. Al-Salih Ayyub, Egypt's sultan, died 4 months later after a lengthy illness. The Ayyubid leadership was embroiled in a power struggle. with an alliance forming between the top military man, Fakhr al-Din, the vizier, and the widow of al-Salih, Shajar al-Dur. They pretended al-Salih was still alive by sending him meals and signing papers in his name. Louis's forces marched up the Nile, and in February 1250, a surprise early morning cavalry charge killed Fakhr al-Din. However, pursuing the survivors into the fortified site of Mansoura led the Crusaders right into the Bahriya Mamluks. It was an abattoir. 600 knights entered, and only a few stumbled out. The Seventh Crusade disbanded in the following weeks, and in April, the Mamluks kidnapped King Louis, essentially demanding a king's ransom. It was not immediately apparent, but this marked the beginning of the Mamluks' ascendancy. Turan Shah, al-Salih's son, rose to power in Egypt, but was assassinated a few days after Louis' capture by Aqtai, the Bahriya Mamluk leader. In May 1250, the widowed Shajar al-Dur was proclaimed Sultana, regarded by some as the first Mamluk Sultan, despite the fact that she was not a Mamluk and was forced to marry the Emir Aybeg, who was then forced by the Bahriya to adopt a child Ayyubid puppet sultan. It was a precarious situation. In Syria, al-Nasir Yusuf of Aleppo took control of Damascus, then invaded Egypt in winter 1250, reaching the outskirts of Cairo before being pushed back by the Mamluks. By 1252, the restless Aybeg had replaced the child sultan with another child, and in 1254, Aybeg and one of his own Mamluks, Qutuz, assassinated Bahriya chief Aqtai, decapitating him and throwing his severed head out of the palace to his waiting Mamluks. The rest of the Bahriya fled Egypt, led by Baybars al-Bundukdari, Aqtai's second-in-command. Baybars, a Kipchak, was a proud and brave warrior who was highly skilled and a close friend of Aqtai. The murder of Aqtai incited him to vengeance, and Baybars spent the rest of the 1250s hopping between the Ayyubid princes of Damascus, al-Nasir Yusuf, and Karak al-Mughith Umar, encouraging both to invade Egypt and depose Aybeg and Qutuz. Baybars was unable to exact his revenge on Aybeg because Shajar al-Dur assassinated him in 1257, and Aybeg's supporters soon killed her. The emirs fought for control of the child sultan, with Mamluk Qutuz emerging as the most powerful. Maintaining the puppet sultan, Qutuz was the true power behind the throne for 2 years, until 1259, when Hulegu and his army approached Syria. That November, Qutuz deposed the boy sultan and assumed the title himself. Now that he was ruling openly, Qutuz found himself as the only power Hulegu had left to march against. Hulegu crossed the Euphrates River in early 1260, marching his vast army to Aleppo. The Ayyubid prince ruling Damascus and Aleppo was al-Nasir Yusuf, who, as previously stated, had been paying tribute to the Mongols since 1243. Al-Nasir Yusuf, like Rukn al-Din of the Nizari Ismailis and Caliph Mustasim of Baghdad, was unsure how to deal with the Mongols. Some members of his court urged him to maintain the relationship with the Mongols, while others, most notably the bellicose Bahriya Baybars, advocated resistance. Baybars desired to lead an army to block Hulegu at the Euphrates and, at least once, physically assault the chief proponent of peace, al-Zayn al-Hafizi. Al-Nasir Yusuf failed to provide troops against Baghdad, to demolish his fortresses, or to appear in person before Hulegu, all of which were compounded by his poor decision to send a belligerent message to Hulegu. Now al-Nasir Yusuf had to face the consequences of his actions. Aleppo, well fortified and garrisoned, was northern Syria's great Ayyubid stronghold. Sitting comfortably in Damascus, al-Nasir Yusuf predicted that Aleppo would be the rock against which the Mongol wave would break. Hulegu was joined in Aleppo by 2 Christian vassals, King Haytham I of Cilician Armenia and Duke Bohemond VI of Antioch and Tripoli, both enthusiastic supporters of Mongol expansion into the region. They understood the dynamic well. Complete support for the Mongols would result in favours and expansion of their own realms. The Armenian Catholicos even blessed Hulegu's army. As the leader of a Crusader kingdom, Bohemond's support for Hulegu did not earn him the same level of praise. The papal legate in Acre excommunicated him in early 1260. Aside from intelligence and troops, they may have provided Hulegu military technology, such as the new counterweight trebuchet that had spread throughout Europe in previous decades. Concentrating fire on one of Aleppo's gates resulted in a breach, and the city fell in less than a week. According to Arabic sources such as Ibn Shaddad, King Hetum of Cilicia personally set fire to Aleppo's great mosque. The city's citadel, commanded by Saladin's elderly son, resisted for a little longer before succumbing, though Al-Muazzam Turanshah bin Saladin was spared due to his age. The fall of Aleppo caused shockwaves throughout Syria. Al-Nasir Yusuf panicked and fled Damascus in the last few days of January 1260. Within 2 weeks, Hulegu's general Kitbuqa was outside Damascus's walls and triumphantly rode into the city on March 1st, according to one source, accompanied by King Hetum and Bohemond VI. The city surrendered peacefully and was spared destruction, though Arabic sources claim Duke Bohemond desecrated the city's mosques. By March 1260, Syria's Ayyubid government had completely collapsed. Al-Nasir Yusuf, the Sultan, fled to Palestine with a shrinking force. The chief cities, Aleppo and Damascus, were now under Mongol control, and Syria's remaining princes, notables and Bedouins submitted to the Khan of Khans representatives. The Crusader state centred on Acre appeared poised to follow Bohemond's lead and submit, with the Sultan of Cairo, Qutuz, standing as the only independent power willing to resist. Hulegu only needed to extend his hand, and everything up the Nile would be his. Hulegu suddenly left Syria. The exact reason is unclear. By the summer of 1260, he was in Azerbaijan with the majority of his army. Some historians, most notably John Masson Smith Jr., argue that it was for logistical reasons. Syria lacked the grasslands to support Hulegu's massive army and herds of horses during the summer. Hulegu made a similar claim in a letter to Louis IX of France in 1262. Possible, but Hulegu had barely touched Syria's available pasture by then, and nothing stopped the Mongols from feeding their horses from the locals' grain stores. Another frequently cited reason is that Hulegu moved east to deal with a shocking situation. His brother, the great Khan Monke, had died while campaigning in China in August 1259. Hulegu is often said to have moved east to deal with the succession dispute. However, Hulegu could not have known about the growing conflict between his brothers Kublai and Arik Boki. More significantly, he returned to Azerbaijan rather than the east. In terms of being able to observe events in Mongolia, the distance between Azerbaijan and Syria is insignificant. The Jochids to the north, led by Khan Berka, had claims to the Caucasus pastures and territory beyond, and Hulegu may have wanted to secure his hold there. But that assumes Hulegu anticipated such a conflict in the first place, which was not always clear when his withdrawal began. Hulegu did intend to attack Egypt, as evidenced by the highly threatening letter sent to Cairo around this time. Qutuz of Egypt claimed to be a descendant of the Khwarezm Shahs, which was sure to rile up the Mongols. Many of the leading figures in Egypt's new government were Mamluks from the Kipchak steppe, whom the Mongols considered slaves. Nonetheless, Hulegu had abruptly withdrawn, leaving Kitbuqa in Syria and Palestine with 10,000 to 20,000 troops, whose actions, as recounted by historian Reuven Amitai Price, indicate that consolidation, rather than expansion into Egypt, was their immediate goal. Kitbuqa's men were divided into two groups. A southern force led by Baydar in Gaza, comprising perhaps half of the army, to guard against Qutuz's actions. Kitbuqa established himself in eastern Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. He was concerned with quelling an uprising in Damascus and securing strongholds such as the Crusader fortress of Sidon. The Franks in Acre were wary of the Mongols and made no attempt to submit, whereas those in Safad did. Karak and its Ayyubid prince, Al-Mughith Umar, in modern-day Jordan, confirmed its submission. Kitbuqa marched through the Golan and northern Transjordan, capturing the wandering Al-Nasir Yusuf and transporting the Ayyubid prince to Hulegu. In Syria, the Mongols established an administration. Al-Ashraf Musa, the former prince of Homs, was appointed as the titular Ayyubid Sultan of Syria, but with no power. That was held by Mongol officials stationed in Damascus and Aleppo. Kitbuqa's force was then a temporary garrison to hold the line until Hulegu returned, not an invasion of Egypt, despite Qutuz violently bisecting envoys sent to demand his submission. Hulegu based this strategy on a fundamental premise. The Mamluk forces in Egypt were small and weak, and they would not dare to confront the Mongols in battle, let alone try to operate outside of Egypt. Unfortunately for Hulegu, his calculation proved incorrect. In March 1260, Baybars and his Bahriya Mamluks returned to Egypt, promising protection from Qutuz. Baybars hated Qutuz for murdering Aktai in 1254. After failing to persuade al-Nasir Yusuf to confront Hulegu, Baybars abandoned him and contacted Qutuz in Cairo. Hulegu was effectively on Qutuz's doorstep, and Egypt's army was small, with most loyalties questionable, and courage even more so. A direct confrontation with Hulegu's main force would be disastrous. When Baybars approached him, Qutuz recognised that the 1,000 Bahriya Mamluks he had brought with him were an invaluable asset. In addition to Baybars' own skill and courage, Qutuz, united against the common foe, greeted Baybars with caution when he returned to Cairo. Qutuz was unsure about facing the Mongols in open battle, but when he learnt of Hulegu's departure, Baybars was instrumental in strengthening Qutuz's resolve. Baybars demanded action, once they were certain Hulegu's withdrawal was genuine. Another opportunity may never present itself. On July 26, 1260, Qutuz's army departed Cairo. The numbers are uncertain, but it was most likely slightly larger than Kitbuqa's force. Approximately 10,000 Mamluks, including the Bahriya and other garrisons, as well as many refugee soldiers fleeing the disintegration of al-Nasir Yusuf's realm. Ayyubid troops from Syria, Turkmen, Kurds and Bedouin. It was a disorganised force, and even the Mamluk emirs were hesitant to advance. The Mongolian reputation for invincibility was at its peak. The Mongols had quickly conquered the impenetrable assassin fortresses, the divinely protected Caliph in Baghdad, and the mighty walls of Aleppo. It must have seemed foolish to expect 20,000 odd troops to make a successful stand. Qutuz persuaded them to press on, humiliating the emirs by telling them that if they didn't join him, he would fight the Mongols alone. Baybars was several days ahead of the main army in the vanguard. In Gaza, he met Baydar and his advance guard. It is unclear whether there was a battle, or if Baydar voluntarily withdrew before the Mamluks, but Gaza was successfully captured either way. Baydar and his forces rode north to meet up with Kitbuqa. Passing through Frankish-held Acre, the Franks remained steadfastly neutral, rather than openly picking sides. However, they sent supplies to Qutuz and did not impede his advance. The devil, you know, and all that. The Mamluk advance caught Kitbuqa off guard. His forces were scattered and had to be recalled, implying that he was not preparing to march on Egypt. His force gathered quickly, consisting of a core of Mongols, Georgian, Armenian and local forces, as well as a large Syrian contingent led by al-Ashraf Musa. They marched south, settling at Ayn Jalut in Galilee, modern Israel. It means Spring of Goliath, where legend has it that shepherd David killed the great Philistine. From Acre, Qutuz's army marched southeast to Ayn Jalut. Rashid al-Din's account describes an ambush led by the Mamluks, but Mamluk sources emphasise the Mongols' prior arrival. Upon entering the valley, Baybars' vanguard clashed with the Mongol advance troops before retreating to await Qutuz. Finally, on September 3rd, Qutuz arrived with the main army and formed up. It was ideal terrain for cavalry, which comprised the core of both armies. The first assault was led by the Mongols, who charged down the line with arrows flying everywhere. The Egyptians were terrified of facing them in battle, and they crumpled before them. Qutuz and Baybars rallied them, but a second Mongol onslaught shattered their nerves. Qutuz rallied them once more, chanting, "O Islam! Allah, help your servant Qutuz against the Mongols." With order restored and the line reformed, he led the Mamluks into battle against the Mongols. It is likely that at this point, al-Ashraf Musa, the Ayyubid prince of Homs on Mongolia's left flank, abandoned them. His desertion, whether planned in secret or simply because his personal bravery did not extend to actual danger, allowed the Mongol flank to be encircled. In close combat, Mamluk's extensive training, superior armour and weapons made all the difference. With their mobility reduced, the Mongols were defeated in close quarters combat, which they despised. According to 14th century Mamluk treatises, early hand cannons were used against the Mongols to make a loud noise to scare horses, rather than to fire projectiles. If true, they could have thwarted Mongol attempts to counter the encirclement. Kitbuqa was most likely killed or captured during this fighting, and according to some accounts, he delivered a defiant final speech to Qutuz. The Mongol army quickly disintegrated after that. Baydar led his contingent on an organised retreat through Syria and across the Euphrates, but many were not so fortunate. Exhausted and injured, the survivors were pursued, with Baybars leading some as far as Aleppo, where he defeated a small group of reinforcements sent by Hulegu to support Kitbuqa. As quickly as the horses rode, word spread that the Mongols had been defeated. Within weeks, Mongol troops and officials abandoned the 1260 conquests and fled over the Euphrates. Damascus and Aleppo were retaken, collaborators were executed, and those who defected on time, such as Al-Ashraf Musa, were handsomely rewarded. It was a narrow victory, but a victory is all they needed. Only a month after the Battle of Ayn Jalut, Qutuz was assassinated, and Baybars proclaimed Sultan. That December, Baydar returned to avenge Kitbuqa, but was defeated by Syrian garrisons led by Al-Ashraf Musa. In the first battle of Homs of the Mongol-Mamluk War, 1,400 Muslims defeated 6,000 Mongols, thanks to local terrain, fog and timely flanking by local Bedouins. In the years that followed, Baybars developed an extraordinary well-organised defensive system against Mongol attacks, putting his entire kingdom on alert to prepare for them. With one exception, the Mamluks would successfully resist repeated Mongol invasions for the next 60 years, following Sultan Baybars' plans. The opportunity to conquer Egypt was permanently lost. Hulegu was furious with the defeat, but it was not regarded as a major loss. Mongol armies had previously been defeated, but they were always quickly avenged. His immediate reaction was to violently execute al-Nasir Yusuf, and when the city of Mosul rebelled upon learning of the defeat, Hulegu punished its ruler in a particularly gruesome manner, tying him down, covering him in sheep fat, and leaving him in the hot Iraqi sun. Flies laid eggs in the sheep fat, and maggots devoured the man alive. Hulegu faced no further revolts from Ayn Jalut, but larger issues arose as Mongol imperial unity came to an abrupt and violent end, and he never avenged Kitbuqa Noyan's death. Ayn Jalut, while not immediately apparent, was the pinnacle of the Mongol conquest of the region. Though only a minor Mongol force had been defeated, the Mongols would not come close to conquering Syria again for 40 years, and only briefly. It provided all the legitimacy the Mamluks and Baybars required. If the Mamluks had been defeated at the Spring of Goliath, it is unlikely that any armed force in the region would have remained strong enough to resist. Ayn Jalut is, without a doubt, the most well-known of all Mongol defeats. Our next episode focuses on the last campaign of the United Mongol Empire under Möngke Khan. If you're enjoying the series and want to help support it, it would be great if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.